Welcome to Mexico, a land in a state of emergency. Its only hope is the army. Powerful drug cartels have the country in their grip. Mexico is a transit route for and producer of drugs of all kinds: cocaine, marijuana, amphetamines. This is a billion-dollar business, and many Mexicans, even at the highest levels of government, want a share. Wars are being waged for drug profits. Cartel against cartel, dealers against police, police against corrupt fellow officers. The battles over lucrative trafficking routes into the U.S. are brutal. Patrolling the streets of Juarez is one of the most dangerous jobs in Mexico. The army has taken control of this border city of 1.5 million. 3 cartels vie for dominance here in the gateway to the U.S. The soldiers are battling a difficult enemy: ordinary Mexicans like themselves. Narcotics are the second biggest source of revenue in the country. Almost 500,000 Mexicans live directly from drug money. No one can say how many live off it indirectly. The cartels are firmly rooted in Mexican society. They've taken over communities and businesses, and they're seeking to do the same with national politics. Today again, soldiers are searching every house that seems suspicious. Security experts are worried. 5 major drug cartels have half the country in their grip. Their annual turnover runs into the billions. In a country with no other growth sector, the drug bosses have a highly effective business model: drugs, guns, money.
During the pre-ruling party, we had a non-written agreement. They were saying, okay, as long as you produce your drugs in Mexico, but sell it elsewhere, you're free, to produce drugs, because you create informal employment, you give services, you give all this stuff. But the agreement was, you produce, but do not sell in Mexico.
For years, the government looked away. Now it's facing the consequences. Almost daily, killer commandos murder dealers, police, and bystanders who happen to get in the way. Bodies are often put on public display as intimidation. In the past year, almost 6,300 people have been shot, beheaded, blown up, or otherwise viciously murdered. 1,600 of them in Juarez. More people died in these brutal drug wars last year than in the conflicts in Afghanistan or Iraq. One victim was Carmen's husband, Juan, a father of 3. He was a police officer. On December 14th, 10 killers raided his small police station and gunned him down. Months later, his children are still traumatized, particularly 7-year-old Rudy. Juan had only been with the police for 2 months. He was one of 3 officers murdered in police stations that night. The killings left the city in chaos. It was Carmen and Juan's 10th wedding anniversary.
And when he didn't get home on time, I watched the news again and again. I was worried that another police officer might have been killed, because that happens daily. I was prepared for the worst, and it was the worst. He'd been killed.
Juan was on duty here in guard post number 8 that December day. He was alone, and because he was still in training, unarmed. He called for help, but no one came. Juan bled to death in the police station, his body riddled with bullets. These days, the area is calm when police come through, but they've been deeply affected by the killing. It could happen to anyone, anytime.
You feel so powerless and angry, because they got him and the others when they were alone. It just wasn't fair. He hadn't done anything to anyone.
The investigations are ongoing. Results so far? Nothing, as with the other murders in Juarez last year. Recently, President Felipe Calderón ordered 7,000 police and military to Juarez in an effort to stop the orgies of violence. Since then, the city has been virtually under siege. Soldiers and hooded police set up roadblocks looking for narcotics and weapons. Across Mexico, a total of 45,000 security forces work in drug enforcement.
Mostly we find money, drugs, and weapons in the doors, for example. Or here behind the steering wheel, there's a cavity. You can hear it.
Since the army took control in Juarez, the number of murders has dropped by half. But that doesn't mean the power struggle is over. The cartels are far too strong, the state far too weak. And the biggest drug market in the world is far too close, the U.S. Around 16 million vehicles a year pass through here. It's the biggest border checkpoint in the world. All roads lead over there. This truck may be empty, but soldiers tap to check for false walls. For $15,000, a corrupt customs officer will wave through a trailer full of contraband. For workers earning $450 a month, that's a big temptation. Almost everyone here is somehow connected to the drug trade, but officially, the operation is called a success.
We've confiscated more than 100 tons of marijuana, large quantities of cocaine and heroin, and more than 1,100 illegal arms.
A success? Hardly. The Army supervises everything, every customs check and every police operation. Half the police force in Juarez is corrupt, insiders say. Bribery is common, right up to the city administration. The new mayor tested police officers for trustworthiness, and a third of them lost their jobs, including the city's police chief.
We had the police force in Juarez so corrupt that the head of the police department, before we took office, who I fired when I went into office, a couple months later was stopped at the bridge going into the United States with about a ton of marijuana. This is the head of the police department, and so corruption went all the way from the police officer all the way up to the top of the operating officer.
Politicians who won't cooperate with the drug bosses are murdered. Some simply resign. The mafia bosses didn't like the new mayor of Juarez. At the end of February, posters appeared all over the city saying, "If you don't resign, we'll kill a cop every 48 hours. After 2 murders, he did resign. It's likely the murder weapons came from the U.S. Given the liberal gun laws there, cartels can easily buy any weapon they need on the open market. The border is not a one-way street. Drugs go into the U.S., arms come back to Mexico. On average, 18 months after a gun is bought in the U.S., it's used in a crime in Mexico. It's a well-oiled system of supply and demand. Many items from this avid trade land up in the Army's secret arms depot somewhere in Mexico City. 88,000 confiscated guns in this warehouse alone are waiting to be destroyed. They say there'll be 305,000 in a few months when the arms come in from trials currently pending. Outside, guns are being dismantled and crushed. In the service of the state, soldiers destroy the very thing that is tearing at the fabric of Mexican society, the tools of organized crime. They destroy 500 weapons a day. 90% of them come from the United States. Doing an honest job is increasingly difficult given the overwhelming power of the heavily armed, cash-rich competition, especially in Juarez. The city lives on foreign investment. A quarter of all Mexican manufacturers supply the U.S. with goods of all kinds from here. If the Americans withdrew their capital, it could spell the end of the Mexican economy. But things could be worse. The city's favorable location and the low wages keep production going here, despite all the violence. Juarez is even attracting new investors.
We have more than 40 companies that are considering jobs and investment for Juarez, and I will tell you that 100% of those companies are concerned about the violence. But so far, not one of those companies has rejected Juarez because of the violence.
Companies that are already here seal themselves off. High fences and security guards keep intruders out. Intruders who've discovered a new way to earn money: kidnapping. Employees of foreign companies are at particular risk.
If there's a sign that says Continental, Bosch, or Siemens, it's a sure sign that money is being made, that money's available. That means employees could be accosted on their way home, or even kidnapped. And yes, there have been such cases.
Security consultant Enrique Tapia demonstrates how quickly that can happen. The victim is abducted in just 20 seconds. Nowhere are there more abductions than in Mexico, and nowhere there more than in Mexico City. Last year, they increased by 30%. Why?
The bottom line is it's a business. Now the government is making dealers' lives difficult, but they have to deliver a specific amount to their capos each month. They need quick money, so they won't get in trouble themselves.
As kidnappings become increasingly ruthless, companies and individuals arm themselves against them. In Mexico City alone, there are 70 workshops for armor plating doors and vehicles. 2.3% of Mexico's gross domestic product, $18 billion a year, is spent on security, giving rise to a kind of specialized war economy. The owners of this company are from Colombia. They have experience with cartel violence.
Mexico is very similar to Colombia and are in the same process. Yeah, that was the reason that we started this company 8 years ago here in Mexico. And we were right. Yeah, 8 years ago, that was maybe half work that we have now.
Because of the many kidnappings, the mayor of Juarez set up safe corridors through the city to enable people and goods to reach the U.S. unharmed. They work well, but perhaps they also help protect the wrong people. That's another open secret in Juarez. Nowhere can stashes of drugs be better concealed than in factories with daily deliveries to the U.S. The army moved into this brewery after cocaine was found here. Now, 2,500 soldiers are deployed in its buildings. Poor rural areas spawn new recruits for the cartels, areas virtually abandoned by the state. Roads, water, electricity, there's not much of anything here. Half the Mexican population lives in poverty. 10% live on less than $1 a day. The soil is poor, working the land is backbreaking. In regions with little infrastructure, there are practically no jobs. For young people with few prospects, a career in drug running seems like winning the lottery.
One of their strategies was to start earning really the souls and love of the people. And what they did was starting building schools for children, starting to build churches for women, and starting giving employment. This is quite important because employment in Mexico, it's a tough problem. So in one way or another, they were an unofficial government in those kind of areas where were forgotten by the government.
Is Mexico a narco state controlled by drug cartels? Even with the Mexican military presence, that's a prospect the U.S. must take seriously. In 2008, the U.S. Joint Forces Command suggested Mexico was at risk of becoming a failed state and warned of a rapid and sudden collapse. These fears may be justified. Brazenly and publicly, cartels display threats and give instructions to politicians and local authorities and carve out their territories. Behind a facade of normalcy, drug and arms dealers create a climate of fear and intimidation throughout Mexico. According to one UN analyst, 63% of all communities are affected. Narcotics have long been a part of life in Mexico City as well. Behind the gleaming facades lurks a shadow economy fueled by drug money. Massive loopholes in the country's tax laws allow for highly efficient money laundering, through property deals, for example. And there are many. Quite often, exchange offices refuse to write receipts. The owners of many restaurants and shops are not who they appear to be. When it comes to tax advisors and frontmen, narcotics barons can afford the best intellectual mercenaries.
In the informal business, 80, 85, 70%, it's related with the drug trafficking or with parallel businesses. For instance, selling illegal copies of movies, illegal CDs, music CDs. On the formal economy, I think it's getting tougher. I would say that, I don't know, between 10 to 15%, they are still money laundering the money through the legal system in one way or another, no?
Such crime is seldom punished. Small wonder, the corruption reaches even to the top state prosecutors. In November 2008, the Attorney General ashamedly admitted that 35 top state servants were in the pay of cartels. Just a few days earlier, a small plane carrying the Interior Minister and a high-ranking narcotics officer had crashed in the city center. There are rumors the mafia was behind the crash. The message? Now absolutely no one is beyond the reach of the cartels. Whenever possible, the government shows the arrests of drug traffickers on television. But these are mostly small fry. The top drug barons are virtually untouchable. They're tipped off by an army of informants. Mexico's drug enforcement officers compare Joaquin Guzman, their most wanted mafia boss, with Osama bin Laden. The kingdom of the Capos, somewhere in the mountainous hinterlands of Sinaloa, is virtually inaccessible to outsiders. Guzman has no trouble hiding. His powerful cartel earns billions from marijuana plantations each year. His personal fortune is estimated at around $1 billion. In March, Guzman made it onto the Forbes list of the wealthiest people on the planet. Recently, the authorities have started offering rewards of more than €1.5 million for drug gang leaders. Only since then have any bosses been arrested. 4 of the 42 were jailed, but not even high-security fences can hold a drug lord for long. Joaquin Guzman simply walked out of prison unchallenged. And for those still inside, it's business as usual, with the help of mobile phones, henchmen, and bribes for prison guards. Security is lax. Women fraternize openly with the inmates. Most here are in on drug crimes. Often entire families do time together.
When someone comes and says, take 30 kilos of marijuana and earn $5,000 with it, then I'll take along 5 kilos on the road here or there. I've got a family. If I do it well, I help my family, and I've got money for everything.
Many here think like that. For them, drug trafficking is a job like any other. Sometimes it's the only job there is. They're criminals without scruples and without limits. This man is unlikely to get his hands dirty. Carlos Slim can protect himself. An armored limousine and bodyguards are just the start. By current estimates, Slim is the 3rd richest man on earth. They call him the King of Mexico, and he's very big in the business world. He's said to get 40% of the capital revenues from the stock exchange here. 67-year-old Slim's many companies are rumored to be worth a quarter of the national budget. Shopping centers, banks, insurance companies, museums. Without Slim, the Mexican economy would come to a standstill. He established his empire when the state sold off its telecommunications monopoly, Telmex. Thanks to superb connections in the government, he bought a huge stake and kept the monopoly. It's a virtual money machine. Slim's empire provides jobs for 220,000 people. He doesn't believe in welfare.
I am very clear that the solution is to give good nutrition from the mother pregnant, to give good education, good health, and jobs. You solve the problem of poverty with jobs.
He may be a miracle job creator, But Slim has exploited his connections ruthlessly, aided by a state that serves the rich at the expense of the masses, a situation the drug world benefits from. Monopolies make individuals more powerful, but they're not healthy for competition or for the country. Here at the Xochiaca refuse dump, countless trash sorters separate out paper and plastic. It's hot, stinking, hard work. They earn 50 pesos a week, too little to live on, too much to die on. Carlos Slim's empire is advancing here too, buying up parts of the dump. Jesuit priest Roberto Guevara supports the trash collectors. He knows the reason behind Slim's sudden involvement in this poor region. A new shopping center is planned here.
Slim's empire, the empire of the powerful, has moved in. And they're building on the land of the poor, who have to live from trash. The fact is, Slim is paying very little per square meter where the trash heap is, 5 to 10 pesos maybe. Later, he'll sell it for 10 or even 15,000 pesos.
Guevara is not very popular with his fellow priests because, unlike them, he doesn't take payment for his services. The church, too, curries favor with Mexico's powerful by staying out of the drug wars. The church has other duties, they say. And some of the richest contributions it receives come from capos, worried about their eternal souls. The less lucrative misery at the trash dump doesn't interest the church. People crawl on their knees in supplication to Santa Muerte. The skeleton figure has become the patron saint of the drug business. Santa Muerte, or Saint Death, is said to protect worshippers from premature death. Millions of Mexicans pray to this unsaintly figure. The characteristics associated with the skeleton lady are appropriate for those she protects. She is said to indulge in all kinds of vices, so cigarettes and alcohol are common offerings from those requesting her mercy. Doña Queta is a self-appointed guardian of this street shrine. She too believes fervently in the miraculous powers of Santa Muerta. Right alongside, her husband sells devotional objects. Business is brisk.
People pray to Santa Muerta for their relatives in prison, for their drug-addicted children and husbands, because they have no money for food, or they've lost their home or job.
A new kind of populist cult is growing in Mexico. A culture of lawlessness is undermining civil society. Drug songs called narcocorridos glorify a life of organized crime. I was once a farmer, now I'm a drug dealer, this man sings. Now I'm a powerful guy.
They are rich, they are famous, they are very well dressed, no? So it's the image of capitalism, of successful businessmen doing what they do best, making money.
The Mexican government stands at a crossroads. The state is giving a show of strength while its foundations are crumbling in a frightening way. All too often, it doesn't fulfill its responsibilities to its people. Drugs and violence have put down deep roots in society over the years. The future of Mexico will stand or fall with the battle for power over the country that is now raging in the streets. The army alone can't uphold the structures of the state in the long run. The border city of Juarez is a test case for the whole of Mexico. In September, the military's mandate expires. The state must use this opportunity to clean up corrupt institutions, to appoint new police officers, to win back the support of the people, and to push out organized crime.
Will they go to another place? Well, that's necessarily an option. I'm pretty sure a lot of operations have gone to another place already. What we need to do as a country is make sure that they go to a different country, and that would be the best solution for Mexico.
As long as there's a massive demand for narcotics in the U.S., drugs will find their way north. Corruption, negligence, and mismanagement have allowed a powerful shadow economy to grow in Mexico, until it now threatens the state itself. It may be years before Mexico can even hope for victory in this war on drugs. Almost daily, killer commandos murder dealers, police, and bystanders who happen to get in the way. Bodies are often put on public display as intimidation. In the past year, almost 6,300 people have been shot, beheaded, blown up, or otherwise viciously murdered. 1,600 of them in Juarez. More people died in these brutal drug wars last year than in the conflicts in Afghanistan or Iraq. One victim was Carmen's husband, Juan, a father of 3. He was a police officer. On December 14th, 10 killers raided his small police station and gunned him down. Months later, his children are still traumatized, particularly 7-year-old Rudy. Juan had only been with the police for 2 months. He was one of 3. Today again, soldiers are searching every house that seems suspicious. Security experts are worried. 5 major drug cartels have half the country in their grip. Their annual turnover runs into the billions. In a country with no other growth sector, the drug bosses have a highly effective business model: drugs, guns, money.
During the pre-ruling party, we had a non-written agreement. You know, they were saying, okay, as long as you produce your drugs in Mexico, but sell it elsewhere, you're free, you know, to produce drugs, because you create informal employment, you know, you give services, you give all this stuff. But the agreement was, you produce, but do not sell in Mexico.
For years, the government looked away. Now it's facing the consequence. Patrolling the streets of Juarez is one of the most dangerous jobs in Mexico. The army has taken control of this border city of 1.5 million. 3 cartels vie for dominance here in the gateway to the U.S. The soldiers are battling a difficult enemy: ordinary Mexicans like themselves. Narcotics are the second biggest source of revenue in the country. Almost 500,000 Mexicans live directly from drug money. No one can say how many live off it indirectly. The cartels are firmly rooted in Mexican society. They've taken over communities and businesses, and they're seeking to do the same with national politics. Welcome to Mexico, a land in a state of emergency. Its only hope is the army. Powerful drug cartels have the country in their grip. Mexico is a transit route for and producer of drugs of all kinds: cocaine, marijuana, amphetamines. This is a billion-dollar business, and many Mexicans, even at the highest levels of government, want a share. Wars are being waged for drug profits. Cartel against cartel, dealers against police, police against corrupt fellow officers. The battles over lucrative trafficking routes into the U.S. are brutal. Officers murdered in police stations that night. The killings left the city in chaos. It was Carmen and Juan's 10th wedding anniversary.
And when he didn't get home on time, I watched the news again and again. I was worried that another police officer might have been killed, because that happens daily. I was prepared for the worst, and it was the worst. He'd been killed.
Juan was on duty here in guard post number 8 that December day. He was alone, and because he was still in training, unarmed. He called for help, but no one came. Juan bled to death in the police station, his body riddled with bullets. These days, the area is calm when police come through, but they've been